Hey, everybody. Hope you had a good Easter weekend. I just wanted to look at a few things for the week coming up. It won't take too long. We'll roll through it really fast. But this week, here's what we are going to look at. So, we only have one day in the white book this week, the day 14. And so it'll be the same. You'll have a quiz on this, a reading quiz, open book reading quiz on Thursday. But just a few of the things. This is what is outlined in this chapter. Just kind of looking at the question or the statement, what happens when God seems distant? Like if you've got a relationship with God and it just seems like He's not there, He's not speaking to you, which could happen a lot during this time. It's happened a lot to me as I'm just sitting here chilling on my couch. Not much to do. Feels like I'm kind of an active person. The way that my relationship with God works is that I feel closest to Him when I'm serving others, like actively with like physical actions, like yard work, construction, food pantry, whatever it is. And so, since I can't do that right now, it's been a period of time where I just feel like my relationship is distant, like we're looking at here. So here are some things to remember, some actions to take that you're going to see in the book this week. The first statement in this chapter is it says, God is real no matter how you feel. Kind of a rhyme there. But the idea of that statement is the way we looked at worship last week in this book. We're not always going to feel like worshiping. We're not always going to feel like we're in a place where we've got that solid relationship and that we can worship God. It's just hard sometimes. We just don't feel like doing it. All right. But the bottom line is that we have to look several places. One, the truth of Scripture. Okay, if God is who He says He is, and He does what He says He's going to do, and He is God, then we can trust Him. So, a few of the things right here that we can do when we feel like God is distant. One, tell God how we feel. We see this with David a lot. I think we looked at this some last week. Is that just express to Him, hey, God, man, I just don't feel close to you, and I don't know where you are. Um, but it's important to remember that when we're expressing those feelings, we need to remember who we're expressing those feelings to. Okay, an unchanging God. So that's the second thing. Focus on who God is. Okay, God's nature doesn't change. We change. All right, we're fallible, messed up people. All right, I change all the time. I'm not always loving. God is always loving. Okay, my mood changes. Right, God is a constant being. His nature is constant, never changes. Okay, he'll always love his people. He'll always be there for his people. Okay, he's always just. He's always merciful when the right situation calls for those things. All right, then trust God to keep his promises. Okay, first thing to do in trusting God to keep his promises is to know what those promises are. All right. We got to know what God promises if we're going to trust Him to keep those promises. You'll see down at the bottom is one promise is that God says, I will never leave you. I will never abandon you. Plenty of things in this world that are going to leave you. They're going to leave you in the dump. Don't care about you. Don't care about your feelings. Don't care about who you are as a being. All right. God is never, He's the only person, only being that's never going to leave you, never going to forsake you. All right. And then the next one is remember what God has already done for you. So part of my story is I moved around a lot. My dad was a pastor, so we moved, and I hated moving. Um, every time I would move, have to leave my friends and then find new ones. Right. No new friends. Right. Um, but how I got through when I look back, every move was incredible. Once I got in, once I got situated, God blessed me with friends. He blessed me with, I got to live with my family. I've never lived around family ever. But in high school, I got to live with my grandma, my aunt, uncles, cousins, all of them in North Carolina. So that was a blessing. So just a reminder for the week when God seems distant, practice these things. Tell Him how you feel. Focus on who He is. Trust His promises. And remember what He's already done for you. Okay. Next thing is our studies, our Right Now Media studies, this week we're doing First Corinthians by Jenny Allen. So this is what it looks like. You'll go into Right Now Media, search First Corinthians, Jenny Allen. This is the first one that pops up if you just put in First Corinthians. So look for this one, click on that one. We're going to be doing session 1 and session 2 this week. That's First Corinthians chapter 1 is session 1. And then session 2 is First Corinthians chapter 2 and 3. All right. So just a little bit of a background on First Corinthians. Okay, this is the legend of Sisyphus. Don't ask me how to spell it. I know how to spell it, but I'm not going to do it. This he was a king in Corinth, and so he made the gods angry, made Zeus angry because he was like a trickster. He was always doing April Fool's jokes, and so Zeus punished him by sentencing him to pushing this rock up a hill. But every time he would get it up the hill, it would roll back down, and he'd have to go back and start all over again. And so this is a Greek legend, a Greek myth. All right, so it didn't really happen. But the point is, what this guy did was he consulted. If he would have consulted the capricious, meaning their mood changes with the wind, like Zeus, okay, he would have sought and found a meaningless, empty, arbitrary God who just kind of does whatever he wants, whenever he wants, without any concern for his people. Okay, so when we look at First Corinthians, we're looking at people who put their trust in things other than the one true God, and what they're running to are empty promises, empty materials, just a lot of empty things instead of what Paul, who wrote First Corinthians, ultimately tells them. So just a little background. The book was written 54, 55 AD, which is really close to the time of Jesus' death. So one thing that people always, they have trouble coming to grips with is the reliability of the Bible, right? Can we trust it? And one thing that you have to look at with any ancient document is, when was it written? How close to the event that actually happened was the book written? And so when you go back, the further back you go, you want it to be really close. And so 24, 25 years is really close to an event for a book to be written. Okay. And so a lot of people will say, well, the resurrection, the death and resurrection of Christ is just a myth. It didn't really happen. It was just added into the story later on. All right. So that especially, we really want the thing to be close. Okay. Because if you think about, say, I don't know, 9/11, all right, September 11th, plane attacks. A lot of y'all weren't born for that. In fact, I don't think any of y'all were born for that. But you hear the story and you know it's not a myth, because of how close we are to that event. People have recorded it. And especially now with technology and everything, events are more easily recorded. They can still be changed a little bit, but it's harder. So, but even with technology, Pearl Harbor, y'all study about Pearl Harbor. There's no question of whether that's a myth or not. And that happened, a very long time ago, right? So back then, though, the way that they told stories was word of mouth, right? They remembered it and they were good at it. The way we tell stories is we document it, record it. Okay, so in the time of Pearl Harbor, there wasn't a lot of news outlets. It was like they would record it through the newspapers, letters, things like that, and then it would go to the stations or whatever to be put out. So you want those newspapers to be written close to the event by people who were actually there, so that it will be an accurate story. Same thing here. You want it to be recorded close to the event. Okay, so the claim that it was a myth is defeated here. 1 Corinthians 15, we looked at that last week. That's where Paul is admitting and confessing, hey, this is Jesus actually physically died and he actually physically rose again here in 1 Corinthians 15. And 1 Corinthians 15, 3 and 5 is an ancient creed of the church. So a creed is basically a statement of faith. Hey, this is what we believe. So if Paul wrote this in 51, 55, this ancient creed had been going around, so we can just 10 years earlier. We can put that in AD 44 if we want to. And it would be very close to the time of Christ's death. And it would be a statement of faith of what the entire church was believing, not just Paul, because one guy could probably change the story a little bit. But if the entire church is making this creed, stating it, then it shows what they believe. All right. And Corinth, it was a city of vulgar materialism, a lot of bad stuff going on there. It was a hub for people, a port city. Ships would come in, dock, load up, unload, load, and go off. And so people would stay there. A lot of people there studied philosophy. It was a wealthy city, and sexuality was a big part of that city. They had the temple to the goddess Aphrodite. She was the goddess of sex. And so the goddess, and it was known, her temple was known as the Temple of 1,000 Prostitutes, right? There's some ancient writers, ancient historians who coined the term Corinthian girl, which was associated with a prostitute. If there was a prostitute, he would say, hey, there's a Corinthian girl. So that shows you the reputation that this city had. So what these Corinthians were doing was there was a lot of, first of all, the church, Corinthians, it's named Corinthians because Paul wrote this letter to the church in Corinth. So believers, Christians, right? And what was happening was they were getting sucked away from the church and persuaded to follow some of the materialism that was going on in Corinth. All right. And so what we see there is Paul just trying to bring them back. Hey, listen, you're gone away from this, but God is the only way that you're going to actually be able to be united and actually be able to find some joy. Okay. And so what we see happening in Corinth is very similar to what's happening in the US today. So the category non-practicing Christians has doubled since the year 2000. Right. And so it's people who identify as Christians, they don't go to church, don't read the Bible, don't really pray. Right. And so this is kind of a weird time in the US where people like to, just do whatever to get attention. They like to do their own thing, a very selfish period of time. And so what's happening is people are just kind of drifting away from God into their own thing, doing what they want to do, what makes them feel good, and not necessarily what would make God happy. Okay, and that's an empty life. There's not going to be much there to find as far as meaning and purpose are concerned. All right, but one thing that people do get twisted is that they'll say, well, this non-practicing party is growing, so Christianity is dying. Well, no, this is the same exact thing that was happening in Corinth. Okay, and now we see where the church is at. Corinth, that's 2,000 years ago, right? Christianity was just started. Weren't many of them. And so even through that little time in Corinth where this church is going through this, you still see Christianity grow because the message of Jesus is undeniable. If you genuinely look and search for truth in Christ, you'll see that it's undeniable. And so just an encouragement to y'all who are right now practicing Christians, but you see the world around you changing, and it's really hard to be an outspoken Christian because you're worried about what people will think of you. But if you go back to the early statement from Purpose Driven Life, God is real no matter how you feel, right? Truth is real no matter how you feel. Even if the truth hurts, that doesn't make it any less true. I've said this before. Suppressing or denying the truth does not make it any less true. So we want to be really sure that the truth we're following is actually the truth that will, return what it promises to return, that it is actually true. Okay, and so the message of Christ is just that. So that's First Corinth. We'll do sessions 1 and 2, just like we've done the rest of the weeks. A couple things here. All right, so this is a sample of the questions you've done. You've seen this before. I've got an example. So number 7 is an example of a bad answer, one with no description, no substance. And then number 8 is an example of kind of what I'm looking for in these answers. right? Now, I don't want this to be a thing. I want y'all to use these as a devotion, right? I don't want to grade them too hard because I don't want it to be like, oh, I got to do schoolwork. I want you to be able to read it and enjoy it and learn something about the Bible, learn something about God. So the question on number 7 is, when has following God felt like you're going against the world? What did God teach you during this time? So you see, there's 2 questions there, but I've got one sentence that answers one thing poorly. It says, when I'm at school. I've been getting a lot of those. Okay, well, what about when you're at school? What is it? What is hard about following God when you're at school? What did God teach you during that time? Just make sure you're answering all of the questions and answering them. Think longer sentences, right? It could even be one sentence. Just make sure it's a compound sentence with 2 things. Like down here at the bottom. All right. So I've got one question. What's one thing you could do this week to be selfless toward another person? Okay. And so this is a good answer. All right. I should ask people if they need anything. I've been locked up. Even a phone call to make sure they're all right would be good. All right, so it doesn't have to be super, super long, but I need some detail. Okay, another thing, you see the statement right above the submit button, send me an email receipt of my responses. Okay, you need to check that box. Okay, this is the only way. So I've had several people say, well, did you get my submission? I did it. Well, if I don't get it, I don't know if you did it. I need some proof that you did it. This is how you'll have proof. So you send this to yourself, you'll get your responses, a receipt that you did the work. That way, if for some reason it doesn't get to me, it should get to me. This stuff's pretty reliable. Should get to me, but if for some reason it doesn't, you just send me your responses that you have been emailed to yourself, and it's no problem. All right. A few reminders. Send y'all don't do this in chat. This is obviously a video recording, so you don't have to worry about these 2 things. Any assignments from last week that you have missing in the grade book, do those and submit them, but send me an email when you submitted them, because I'm not going back to check on, just that's not what I'm doing for fun in quarantine. All right. Send me an email just so I'll know to go back and check. These are my Zoom office hours. You can refer to this if you need help. Come on, and we'll get it figured out. Hey, hope y'all have a good day and a good week. Let me know if you need anything outside of school, prayer requests, anything you need. Contact me anytime. Doesn't have to be in these Zoom hours. Just make sure you email me to make sure I'm not doing some super fun activity here in my apartment. Okay, y'all have a good one.